Hi, I'm Sandra Wilson. I'm a clinical hypnotherapist who works with misophonia and extreme sound sensitivity. And in today's video, I thought I would answer another million-dollar question. What actually changes when misophonia therapy works? So what could you expect to see change in your life by having successful therapy for your misophonia and your sound sensitivity? So if you're living with misophonia and struggling with it, you've probably asked yourself, can therapy actually help? And yes, it can, but what would that actually look like? Because let's be honest, I would say that most people probably are hoping for a magic cure, even if deep down you know that's just not possible, because no type of therapy offers a magic cure. So what often, especially with the clients I see, they understand that I don't offer a magic cure, because if I did, I would be extremely wealthy. What my own clients seem to want when they contact me is something a little bit more practical. They just want their lives to be their own again, for life to feel more manageable again. So when misophonia is so intense, life often shrinks. You might just avoid eating with other people, especially your family, which can be so distressing. You might feel very tense before going out to social events. You might constantly scan the room or scan the restaurant just so you can be aware of any sounds that might trigger you. You might worry that your reactions are damaging your relationships, and also, and this is a biggie, you may feel deeply ashamed of how strongly you respond. And of course it can feel isolating and very exhausting, right? So what actually changes when therapy works? So first of all, you may notice that the intensity of your trigger responses often does feel smaller. It can reduce, not necessarily overnight, and not always perfectly, but the emotional spike just becomes less noticeable and less overwhelming. And the reaction doesn't hijack you in quite the same way, because let's be honest, there's nothing worse than just anticipating that hijack feeling, which sends you raging or recoiling. And secondly, recovery often can become faster. So instead of staying completely discombobulated for hours after, very upset and dysregulated, you might find that you're able to settle a little more easily and return to a sense of calmness, that baseline sense of just being okay. You can get there a lot more quickly. And sometimes something shifts within, because I've said in previous videos, the reason why one person has developed misophonia may be very different to how another person, or why another person developed it. And often we do subconsciously label ourselves. So some people may move from this label of I am weird, I am broken, to I am okay just as I am. My nervous system has learned this response, and this alone sometimes can reduce the shame. So you are not broken, it's just that your nervous system has learned to respond to the sounds that trigger you in a certain way, okay, and it's not your fault. So when the shame reduces, relationships often feel more possible again for you. And, they feel healthier too, because you're not always having to over-explain or hide away. So you may still notice the sounds, of course you will, but they don't run your life in exactly the same way as they always have, because you're creating a different story, a different narrative about them. And that can be surprisingly powerful. So you might be able to sit with the sounds for longer. In fact, I've had quite a lot of clients who've spoken to me the day after and said, oh, I just realised, and it only occurred to me, that I managed to sit on the sofa with my husband while he was eating a Mars bar. And I hadn't even realised until he'd finished it. And then I thought, oh, wow. You see, because sometimes these things can sometimes take us by surprise. So you may be able to stay more present in your conversations without fixating on how somebody speaks. You may even notice that you haven't put your noise cancelling headphones on when you normally do. And I have seen this. I was working with somebody who was so badly triggered by next door neighbour's dogs. She was always wearing her headphones. And then a few days later, she emailed me and said, the funniest thing, I realised I wasn't wearing my headphones. And it just occurred to me that I wasn't wearing them. And do you see what I mean? Oftentimes, when we are expecting a certain result, we can often be a little bit disappointed. But sometimes when you just completely, you're just getting on with your day, you realise that you haven't been triggered, okay? So you may notice this a lot more when you're walking into a room or walking into a restaurant and you're not immediately scanning for danger. Again, that is a very subconscious habit that you would have picked up. So the goal isn't necessarily to erase your misophonia. I don't think anyone can promise to do that for you, but it's to help you feel steadier, more resourced, and less trapped and isolated by it. Okay, so for some people that means fewer explosive reactions. For others it might mean more trust, more self-trust. For others it means their world opens up to them again and they are able to let more people in and be closer to their loved ones. So that really is what good therapy can help you achieve, rather than just erasing misophonia, because I cannot promise you that. Okay, so if you're exploring working with a therapist or even with me, just maybe just ask yourself, what would be different in my life if my reactions felt more manageable? And you can just start from that standpoint. What would you be pleased to notice? And then that's usually a really good place to start. So if any of this resonates with you, you're very welcome to get in touch with me, or you can maybe take a look at my website. There's a link in my bio. If you're on YouTube, it's in my description. And just to remind you that I work with adults and I work with children who experience misophonia, and misophonia being such a deeply subconscious problem, often the transformation has very little to do with what you're noticing in terms of the triggers. It's a lot wider, it's a lot broader. And once you get your head around this, honestly, you will never look at your life in the same way again. So if you're keen to explore how you can reduce that sensitivity and reduce that overwhelm and support your nervous system a little bit more, do get in touch. So that's it for today, and have a lovely day, and I'll be back another day with more content. Bye for now.